of Democratic Services Committee. It's the 11th of October 2021. My name is Councillor Del Morgan and I am the chair of this committee. Just to make everyone aware, today's meeting will be recorded, is now being recorded, Chloe, I think?
Yeah, it's been recorded.
Thank you. Can I check if anyone is present from members of the public or the press? I don't see them on my list.
I can't see any, Chair.
Okay, I'll skip this part then. Can I remind everyone to please switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting? I'll do so myself. In addition, can I refer everyone to the protocols for remote meetings which have been previously circulated, namely microphones should be switched to mute unless you're speaking. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand via Teams. I will assume that you've all read the paperwork before us today prior to the meeting. Please only use the chat function to indicate if you wish to speak as an alternative to the electronic hand function or to raise any technical issues. When asking a question, can you please indicate which page number you're referring to? And when speaking, please introduce yourself, unless I do so for you. As you can see, the first item on the agenda is to do a roll call. I'll now ask Chloe from Democratic Services to take us through this. Chloe, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've marked you as present. Councillor Howard Aubrey.
Present.
Sandra Miller. Councillor Sean Percy.
Present.
Councillor Suzanne Renkes.
Present.
Councillor Anthony Taylor. I've just had apologies in from Councillor Leanne Jones. We've also had apologies from Councillor Alan Llewellyn and Councillor Steve Hunt. So next, Councillor Anthony Richards.
Presennol, present.
Councillor Jeremy Hurley.
Present.
And Councillor Stephanie Lynch.
Presennol, present.
And officers, Craig Griffiths.
Present, Chloe.
Sorry. And Stacey Curran.
Present.
Okay, that's the roll call complete, Chair.
Diolch yn fawr, Chloe, thank you. So item 1 within part 1, before I count it, I should actually say croeso Stacey, first meeting as head of Democratic Services. So members, colleagues, I'm going to ask for declarations of interest, which is item 1. Are there any today? No indications?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting, pages 3 to 6. I'll go through them page by page. Members, shout out if you have anything that you wish to challenge. Page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6. Members all happy to receive and accept those minutes? Diolch yn fawr. I'm having some wry smiles I'll take as acceptance. Okay, so we're on to item 3, which starts on page 7. This is pages 7 to 20, with a recommendation on page 10. So this is the assessment of resources for the Democratic Services Committee. Okay, so I'm passing over to Stacey, I think, to introduce this. Stacey, diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Chair. So since the committee and the council delegated the role of head of democratic services to the democratic services manager, the focus of the work in the team now has shifted from the operational sort of management day to day to a more strategic element, such as implementing the requirements from the Local Government Wales Act, preparing for the member induction 2022 and so on. So as a result, there's now a need to restore the operational day-to-day management within the team. So part of the responsibility of the head of democratic services is to advise committee on how best to structure the team to discharge their democratic services functions. So you will see in Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 the existing structure of the team and the structure that I'm proposing to best discharge those functions to you today. You'll see from the recommendation on page 10 in conjunction with those structures that I'm proposing to introduce 2 senior democratic services officers into the team at grade 9, and they'll be ring-fenced to the existing democratic services team given the level of expertise and knowledge that they're going to need to have. They'll be responsible for overseeing scrutiny, support and project management and committee administration and forward work programming respectively. And I'm also proposing to recruit to the vacant grade 7 post at this time within the team as well. So the structures are there for members' comment and any questions, Chair, I'm welcome to take this morning.
Diolch, Stacey. Members, colleagues, you've seen the appendices. Appendix 1 is the current structure and the proposed structure is in Appendix 2 and the report itself, of course, with the recommendation. I'm happy now to receive any questions or any comments. If there aren't any questions or comments, we'll go straight to page 10. The recommendation is to accept and endorse the proposed structure set out in Appendix 2, page 15. Somebody move that?
Yeah, I'll move, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. Seconded?
Chair.
Thank you, Harriet. Right, if there are no dissenters, then all happy that we go with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, it is right. So the next item now then, item 4 is the report of the member induction 2022 and diversity in democracy task and finish group, pages 21 to 54. Recommendations come on pages 24 and 25. Craig, you're going to talk us through this one?
I will, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. So as members will be aware, over the last few months, we've had a few task and finish group meetings to look specifically at our member induction programme now that will commence from May 2022. So the officers have been working on this and trying to sort of programme everything in, taking on board some of the comments and feedback the members provided us and some of the additional changes, obviously, which we will need to accommodate then from May 2022 onwards. So what's before you today is just the provisional timetable that we've prepared at this stage, so you'll be able to be cited on where things are heading. It remains very much provisional at this stage because there will be additional elements we'll probably be adding at some point over the coming months, and we're going to be meeting with corporate directors in specifically this week just to make sure we can reflect additional elements that they think it could be beneficial for members to have some understanding of and oversight of at the same time as well. So that's the provisional timetable. It's set in 2 formats, obviously, with a list of all the various different meetings and what will be taking place, and then a diary marker just to show ultimately how we're trying to spread it out. We're very conscious of the fact we don't want to overload members in the first fortnight, 3 weeks. I mean, there's certainly going to be a lot to try and get used to in other ways as well for anyone new coming on board. So it's trying to be a more structured programme to give you the basic information that's needed in the weeks leading up, obviously, to the annual general meeting, and then everything else then we'll try and phase gradually or up until the summer and revisiting it then from the September onwards. So it's before members today just to be cited on, and you can see obviously what the task and finish group have considered. We'll be taking a report to full council just for information purposes, so members who were not on the committee who may not have seen it will also be able to be cited as well. Coupled with that then, we have the diversity and democracy work that the task and finish group are also looking at, and we've prepared an action plan which is here today for members' endorsement and obviously any final comments that members may have. Once that's confirmed, again, we'll be taking it to full council just for everyone to be cited on it to see what we're doing, and then Stacey, the team and I then will be looking to implement quite a few of the elements going forward. One thing I would just draw members' attention to, we've made a lot of talk throughout that diversity and democracy plan about the Be a Council website. That is now live on our website with various different bits of information, and we'll be building on that now over the coming weeks and months as well, uploading more information for everyone ultimately to be aware of. But just so you know, that is now live, and we have notified all the various group leaders that this facility is there then as part of any programmes going forward. So Stacey, the team and I are happy to answer any questions the members may have, Chair, on any of those documents.
Diolch yn fawr, Craig. And members, there are 2 separate parts to this, but those of you who've been engaged with the task and finish group will have been through all the details, I'm sure. But any final points or any members wish to raise anything or say anything about either of these two sections? Sean, I see your hand up. Yes, Sean.
Yeah, only briefly, Chair, just to say that I'm very happy with it. You know, I'm part of the task and finish group that has discussed many of these issues, and yeah, I just want to endorse what's in the report, and we'll be of course supporting it today.
Thanks, Sean. I don't see any other hands up. So, members, do you want to look at the recommendations and pages starting on 24, rolling over onto page 25? There's recommendations A and B there. Someone move. Sean, you want to move?
Yes, I'll move, Chair.
Someone second then, please.
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Harad. So all members, if you're happy, that'll go through. No dissent. I'm waiting for any hands. No abstentions. Thank you very much, gentlemen. So that passes. Okay, so the next item now is item 5, public speaking protocol, pages 57 to 72, with recommendations on pages 61 and 62. So to introduce this one, then please, Craig, can you bring us up to speed?
Of course, thank you very much, Chair. So members will have heard me mention on a number of different occasions in the various committees that we've had that, as well as the Local Government and Elections Act, we're looking specifically at our democratic arrangements and public participation in our decision making. And so there's various different strands that are ultimately going to be relevant for that. We've talked specifically about public speaking at meetings, petition schemes, constitutional different elements, all about trying to get the public involved in decision making ultimately within the council. So this is another one of these reports that ultimately contributes to this element. And although legislation says that we have to try and find ways ultimately to involve the public in decision making, we do have a lot of discretion ultimately in some ways as to which way in which we look to take that forward. So one of the proposals specifically we wanted to bring to members is to introduce what we're calling a public speaking at council meeting process. So what this will effectively be is at the start of every meeting, so namely focusing on full council, cabinet boards in specifically, just to note, licensing and planning operate under a slightly different regime in the way in which the public can speak. So we've excluded those specifically from this process at this stage, but focusing more on the executive decision making of cabinet and cabinet boards and full council as well. So in effect, it's a period of time at the start of every meeting where if members of the public wish to ask a question to decision makers, they'll have a forum where they can submit that question in advance and answers then can be provided at the meeting. So there'll be an opportunity for members of the public to attend the meeting to ask the question themselves, or we can try and manage it in a different way at that time. So all of this is having the aim of perhaps involving the public much more in decision-making processes. If there's an item specifically on the agenda which they'd like to be considered and their views be considered by the members at the time of decision-making, there'll be a forum in which that can ultimately then take place. So this is very much a trial period at the moment, because we think it's something that's going to have to be developed over time, and we're going to have to try and engage with the public to try and find out what works and what doesn't work. It's quite new. Obviously, a lot of authorities to date have included certain elements in their full council meeting. We haven't done it to date, but fingers crossed now going forward, we can try and get this up and running and hopefully publicise it. And it'll be nice to see some members of the public who wish to ask a specific question being engaged in that process as well, on whenever it will be. So Appendix 1 of the report sets out our draft protocol, which is pretty much similar to what most authorities ultimately would use. It basically sets out the type of questions that members of the public can ask, more specifically the types of things that they can't ask, which have to be considered in a slightly different forum ultimately for it. So it's before members today, hopefully for endorsement, and obviously to confirm from a democratic services perspective, you're comfortable with what it will ultimately bring. And then it will be taken to full council then for final approval, because it will involve some slight changes to the constitution, as I just built some of the procedural rules in, and we build in those rights for people to attend the meetings then as well. So happy to answer any questions that members may have, Chair, on this. But as I mentioned, this is the start now of lots of different participation schemes which are going to be coming forward over the coming months.
Craig, the appendix is quite detailed in that the framework, the rules and regulations for how we're going to try this. I think we use the word pilot. I think that would be a good way of putting it, but we have to do it. So I'm sure members will have points to raise on this. I can see one hand up already. That's Councillor Sean Percy. Sean?
Yes, thanks, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Craig, for bringing this here. This is something I'm particularly interested in seeing coming forward. I guess my first question is, obviously the protocol talks about ordinary meetings of council, full council, and cabinet boards specifically. So is this not going to come into the scrutiny side of things? I'm just wondering if there's a distinction there where we're drawing a line to say actually the scrutiny committee are going to do their bit and the public will have their chance to ask questions of the executive and the cabinet board. I just wanted some clarity on that.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct indeed. We were conscious of the fact that scrutiny is about members scrutinising the various processes. So we wanted to introduce the opportunity for the public to be able to ask these questions. And as it stands at the moment, when you look at a scrutiny committee, the cabinet members are usually there as invited guests of the scrutiny committee. They haven't got a status ultimately within that meeting. So when the members of the public want to ask various questions, the people we want them to ask are the people who will ultimately then be making that final decision ultimately for it. So for that reason, we've kept scrutiny as somewhat separate, so the scrutiny becomes the members' forum to be able to consider these issues. It could work out down the line, maybe, that we would look at some slight changes to perhaps the questions could be asked during a scrutiny committee so that members could hear them as part of it. So there is going to be some further refinement, I think, that would be beneficial ultimately down the line. But the focus at this stage is obviously at the decision-making forums, not the scrutiny element itself, because I wanted to keep that member-led and member-driven, obviously, as part of that process.
Yeah, no, thanks, Craig. I think, yeah, you've kind of picked up the point that I was thinking, really, which is, as a scrutiny member, I'd be interested in what the public was saying, and of course we could wait on and join the cabinet board meeting and listen to that. But I think there is that balance, isn't it, of carefully drawing the line as well for the public to understand that, I'm a backbench councillor and, I can't answer questions in the same way that a cabinet member could. So I see exactly why it's been done. But I think that point you've made about maybe scrutiny members wanting to hear those questions and hear the answers as well, I think is something we do need to consider, because that jumped out at me a little bit. Obviously, whether we look at that down the line once we've tried it. But that was the first point. The second thing was about the number of questions somebody can ask in a municipal year. Now, obviously, these questions are not coming to me, so it's easy for me to say, well, they should be able to ask as many as they want. I'm not too comfortable with that clause, if I'm honest with you. If there are members of the public that really want to engage in an issue, or just generally, if they are switched on and they want to get involved, I do worry that that may be problematic. I know there's some chair's discretion around it as well, which may help. I'm assuming it's there to stop people who maybe just want to maybe disrupt the process, or just kind of have their presence heard without really contributing. But I'd question whether that's the right way to do it, and maybe it sends slightly the wrong message that we're going to say there's a protocol, but it's really limited. So I don't know. I'm not so sure about that one. I just kind of yeah. I don't know. I'm assuming you considered all these issues when this was being put together.
Yeah, I'll bring Craig back now. I noticed that Sean, there's a phrase in there which said that you limited it to 2, but with any further questions being accepted if at the discretion of the chair. But of course, there's different chairs involved each time, and somebody's got to have an overarching view of this. Questions coming in from Mr. Bloggs, to different scrutiny or different cabinet board meetings. So that anyway, Craig, what do you think?
If I could pick up just the point about scrutiny first, Chair, one of the things I'd like to suggest we're going to be looking at as part of this is if there are questions that are going to be asked in the Cabinet, the scrutiny committee will be aware of the questions that are going to be asked. So if they want to attend the actual Cabinet then to hear the answers ultimately that will be provided, that will be there. So there will be that flow of communication so the scrutiny members can be aware of it. And it could be the case maybe that the scrutiny committee will say, well, we need to perhaps hear the answer to that as part of the element there, so it can all go through as part of that process as well. So we will be addressing that as part of the process. The issue about the 2, I very much do agree with you. There's been a lot of debate in between myself, Phobos, as I was looking at this, and I was comparing it to other authorities to see what approach they adopted, and most tend to go through the 2 or 3 mark. They want to encourage questioning, but they also don't want repeat people coming in just asking similar type of questions or different elements in different ways. Now, I've tried to reflect that ultimately within the policy itself, which talks about if somebody has a similar type of question, it can't be asked again ultimately for it. So if members were collectively of the view that they didn't want to put a cap ultimately on the number of times that a person could attend a question, that is absolutely fine. I mean, it's a figure obviously that we came up with just to try and make sure that there are various different people out there. So if there was a queue of people who wanted to ask a question, no one person is obviously always taking the lead ultimately for it. So it's a way of trying to build a little criteria there. But if it's something that members would feel, well, at this stage, we'd like to encourage maximum effect ultimately for numbers of ultimately who would attend, I'm fine to go with that as well, because we're saying we're going to be reviewing it during a period anyway. So if the Democratic Services Committee's consensus is that we don't put a cap on the number and we just let it be in line with the policies itself as it's standing, that is perfectly acceptable at this time as well, and we can easily remove that element from the document, Chair. So it's what everyone else is comfortable with.
I'll bring Sean back in now in a minute. You're quite right. You need to strike a balance between people coming back too often. They become almost vexatious, and on the other hand, you want to encourage people to participate in the democratic process. So on the one hand, do you set a limit in order, on individuals in order to encourage other individuals to join in instead? I suppose that's where we are. But I'm quite open on this one. Sean again.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Craig. I think, I totally get where you're coming from with this one. I think the other safeguards perhaps in the policy are perhaps adequate. You've mentioned about the repeat questions. We've also got a time limit as well, which I think is really important. So, there is a sort of safeguard in terms of how much of the committee's time can be taken up by, some of these questions and queries. I think your point about maybe if there was a queue of people, my inclination would be at this stage would be maybe replace it with a clause that says, if there's a number of questioners, the priority would be given to people who haven't previously asked a question, something like that, which I think might be sensible. But I would rather us trial it without a limit and then reactively change it if it's a problem, if I'm completely honest with you, because I think we need to set the right tone and the right message to the public when we make this step. I'd rather us make it the big step and say, well, actually, look, we're open. And obviously this is my opinion, of course, but I'd rather us do it that way. And then if we encounter issues, then we can look at the policy afterwards. But I'm quite content with the 15 minutes with no repeat questions, no multiple questions from the same organisation, all that sort of stuff. I think you've covered off a lot of those bases that perhaps negate the need for this particular clause. So that's my view anyway, Chair. But no, thanks for that, Craig.
One way around it, Sean, might be to reword it. The number of questions an individual can ask in a municipal year shall normally be limited to, we can either say 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it is. But with plenty of flexibility then for the chairs of whatever the cabinet board it is to reflect on any additional questions they may wish to put. But I know we want to try and encourage people to come at us with questions. Anyway, see what other members think. We've got a couple of hands coming now. So Councillor Suzanne Renke. Suzanne?
Thank you. I apologise if you can hear some funny noise in the background, but somebody's cutting down trees next door to me. So I've got a little bit, I feel a trepidation about not putting any limit on, because I can think of, and I'm sure we've all got this kind of resident who sends, a million emails, never mind asks, being given the opportunity to ask a million questions. And they wouldn't necessarily repeat the question. They'll find something else every time, but just to be difficult. And I think so. I think there needs to be something in there where we can be able to manage those types of residents.
Craig?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a balancing act ultimately at that point for it, Chair. So I think I take on board obviously the point Councillor Venkers is making, the points Councillor Percy is making, is perhaps one of the suggestions, you know, we look at an increased number, ultimately with the option of further discretion to us to be seen not to be rudimentary or quite basic in the figure of 2, which could be a relatively small amount. It could really go either way. I'm conscious of the fact, as I mentioned with Councillor Percy, we can control the type of question in that sense in quite a significant way. But the purpose of the 2 is obviously to ensure the number of times a person, a member of the public, could ultimately attend. What it's designed to achieve is that when things are passionate for people in the community, obviously, and they've got a relevance there, they've got the opportunity ultimately to attend, to be able to make their points known ultimately for it. But you could realistically go either way in that sense for it. As I said, we are aiming to consider this a pilot scheme. We've said 12 months ultimately as part of the process. Is the compromise we bring it down to 6 months and we look to see how it's progressed, and we review it then ultimately at that point to see what's working, what's not working with numbers of people, etc. And we could try it in a variety of different formats. So it's what really the committee are comfortable with effectively is the key element here.
I know exactly the sort of person that Suzanne mentions. You know, you can potentially have a member of the public who just literally wants to send in a new type of question just for the sake of bombarding the council, and we have to avoid spending too much time and resource on maybe what is at the end of the day an incredibly small set of issues, or at least one person sending in all these questions. But I take Sean's point. You don't want to word a policy in a way that seems to be saying, well, we're opening this up for the public, but we don't really want too much of you. We got to get the balance right there, haven't we? So I don't know, maybe some form of words which suggests that there is a norm involved of a certain limit of questions, but that by no means prevents people coming back with additional ones, subject to chair's discretion or whatever. I don't know. You might be able to come up with some form of words, Craig. I see there was a hand up with Stephanie. Did you want to ask a question?
Suzanne covered it. Sorry, Councillor Venkers covered it.
Oh, right, okay. You have people like this as well in your area, I know. We all do. Yes, we've got to get the balance right. Craig, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking whether we can reword it in a slight way, which basically says that if you've asked a question before, or you've asked a number of questions previously, the chair will consider, obviously, if there are other people who can take precedence in that sense, because they've never asked any questions previously. And ultimately, we try and get a balance then that way. So if it's the case that people want to ask questions and there's nobody else on the list, rather than saying, well, you've already asked 2 questions, we're not going to allow you to ask any more, we could still allow those elements unless there are a number of other people in the list who maybe want to ask a question instead, and we try and prioritise it that way. So what I could suggest then, Chair, if the members are happy, is if I look at that specific wording ultimately before it comes back to full council for adoption, and I'll try and open it up the possibility, obviously, that we're not going to be limiting for the number of questions, but we try and put a control on it to make sure that if we do have repeat questions, for example, we just want to ask a question at every single meeting or something maybe that is not overly relevant, we've got a few more controls ultimately that come with it. So I'll do a little bit of play around with some of that wording, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I mean, ultimately, we need to decide then whether we need to set a limit, but say it in the way that it's normally, but you have the chance to get around it if chairs are happy, or we actually say there's no limit, but we will try and police it if people are coming back too often with questions which seem to be bombarding the council. I leave that form of words to yourself and whichever way you go about it. Suzanne, you got your hand back up. Then Suzanne, please.
No, I put my hand down. Sorry, I don't know why it's
all right. Don't worry. Perhaps you double-clicked it. Sean, you want to come back?
Yeah. Only briefly, Chair. Thanks. No, I guess a follow-up question would be, in terms of the cabinet boards, who is the chair in the cabinet boards?
It's ultimately whoever they agree at that particular meeting
Yeah.
ultimately is going to be the chair in that sense. So whether there are 2 or 3 cabinet members who sit on that specific board, the chair is normally appointed at that meeting.
Yeah.
If there was a case that we would have a question beforehand, we'd be asking the cabinet members in advance which one of them is going to be chair in that case.
I
So
guess
that
my issue of the concern I've got from a scrutiny point of view is obviously we wouldn't have in a member scrutiny committee the executive deciding what questions are able to be asked of them. And I do feel there is something a bit not quite there in terms of the way this has been set up, where the cabinet members who will be answering the question will be the ones deciding whether the question is appropriate to be asked of them. I feel there's a bit of an issue there in terms of should they be the ones making that call. Obviously, if it was in a scrutiny setting and the scrutiny chair was deciding it, then it's slightly different, isn't it? Because they're not part of the executive. So that's just in the course of this discussion, that's kind of come to me really. If we're going to say the chair's got a lot of discretion, that might be something we need to be aware of. Obviously, it will depend on each cabinet member as to how they decide to use that power. But you can see how that could be used in the wrong way, couldn't you? In a setting where a controversial question or a difficult question may come in, and the cabinet member's decision, which is final, may be to rule it that it's not taken. So I don't know whether that's something that can be thought of in the meantime. That might be a bit too big for before council, but that's something that's a bit of a concern for me in terms of making sure that, you know, because we want really substantive, important questions to be heard, don't we? This is meant to be a way of opening up scrutiny to the public as well, isn't it? So just a thought for me. Thanks.
Another good point, Sean. Yeah, I take
right.
that.
I think that's where we've tried to limit, obviously, the criteria, and obviously which somebody could ultimately to reject a question. I think that's why it's very important we've got that defined criteria. So the discretion to be able to say I'm not going to answer that question has to be specifically.
If I jump in, I guess that's my particular issue with the 2. And then it's the chair's discretion, because you're effectively giving them open discretion if somebody's asked 2 questions already to say, well, do I want to take that question or do I not? And actually, if someone's asked 2 questions, you effectively give the chair the power to say no. And maybe you know that's a bit too tempting. If the question's difficult, to just say, oh, you've asked 2, I'll leave that one. So maybe that's the issue there, actually.
Exactly. We need to make sure there is a defined criteria then, obviously, as to when that discretion can or cannot be applied ultimately in that regard. That's fine. I can put a paragraph in to address that. Yeah.
The question Sean asked about the discretion of the chair is central to this, but and I don't want to push too much responsibility to officers, but I guess in piloting this, we're going to have a strong input from Democratic Services when it comes to, I mean, I don't know whether we have you know, is it 6 or 7 individuals in Neath Talbot who are going to bombard us with questions, or is it going to be dozens and dozens, and we're going to have genuine, you know, democracy happening? So the balance between the 2, I think we'll be trying to reach that balance as best we can, and I'm sure Democratic Services will assist. And where there's a recommendation or some advice from Craig, from Stacey, from the team, you know, to take to a scrutiny cabinet or a cabinet board, meeting, for example, then the chair at least will have something to go on. At the end of the day, Sean is right, it's the discretion of whoever is picked that particular morning or afternoon to be chair of that meeting. So, I mean, if you like, it's a little bit like it is now with standing orders for us. If a chair wants to stop me in my tracks, you know, then he or she probably can. But at the end of the day, we want to try and get the balance right between encouraging democracy and, on the other hand, maybe stifling the small minority of awkward people. So that's what it is, and I think you know, Sean raises important questions. Right, thank you. I'm looking at any other hands. No. Craig, one point I think I've mentioned to you before is that this this pilot, as we call it, and this rolling on into what will become a permanent feature needs to be handled carefully. You've mentioned that yourself. I think only very crucial element of this will be training for the respective chairs. Now it will involve all the cabinet members, I'm imagining, and perhaps others. So we need to think about what kind of training is necessary for them and actually provide some training. So maybe pilot some dummy questions to come to to see what they make of it, and whether the discretion of allowing questions or not, because there's a whole list of of potential obstacles to the questions, as we've heard in the appendix. Not even if it's a first-time question from someone, there are reasons not to allow it, and some of those can be marginal judgment calls, can't they? So I think a lot of training is necessary. So we need to build that in and resource that. So those would be my only points, I think, Craig, to check on those things in advance before we start jumping in. Right, I still see no hands, so colleagues, we're going to go to the recommendation, pages 61 and 62. It's in two parts. So we're looking at the draft protocol and then delegated authority for myself to liaise with Craig and with Stacey, I guess, to finalise any points that any members might send in after this meeting. We'll pick up the substantive one raised by Sean about the balance and reword that, I'm sure. So if that's okay with everyone, somebody please, will you propose that?
Yeah, I'll move, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. Seconded, anyone?
I will.
Diolch yn fawr, Angharad, thank you. Right, so if members are happy with that, yes, diolch yn fawr, that will be implemented. Diolch. Okay, so the next item 6 is the IRPW, the Independent Remuneration Panel for Wales Annual Report, pages 73 to 158, with a recommendation printed on page 75. So I'll hand this one over to Craig. Are you doing this one?
I'm indeed, Chair. Thank you very much. So members obviously of Democratic Services Committee will be aware that on an annual basis we receive a copy of the draft IRPW's salary remuneration proposals, and what happens usually is that the head of Democratic Services will do a response to these proposals, but we bring it to the Democratic Services Committee just to have a sound in from members and to make sure that any particular points that members wish to communicate can ultimately be incorporated in the head of Democratic Services response that's going to be taken here. The important element to be aware is we're not asking for a decision today from any members, because this is something ultimately we have no control over. These are the figures that will be set by the IRPW, and it will then become a matter for individual members to determine whether they wish to accept these revised amounts then, which will be produced. What we're also conscious about is obviously this will take effect within the next civic year, effectively, when after local government elections in May 2022, there will be a different set of members, in some cases maybe, who will also be considering these proposals as well and what they wish to consider there. So the reason for bringing this report today is just to highlight to you the nature of the changes that the IRPW are proposing, and we've set out the main elements in your actual report itself, where you can see the table of the proposed salary changes which are being suggested. But as I said, we're not asking for any decision today, because the council won't make a decision on this as to whether to adopt it or not, because it will be set on us by the IRPW as part of their considerations and their annual report now, which they produce in the start of 2022. But again, if members have any comments or any issues they wish to raise this, we can factor that into the response then that we'll be submitting back to IRPW, Chair.
Jill, Craig. Members, colleagues, you have a long document with many appendices, but the gist of it comes in certain sections. I'm sure you've looked at them. Bit of an eyebrow raiser with regard to what is proposed in one or two parts. Has anybody got any question or any comment you wish to make? In due course, we will be making an authority response, as you know, but now is your chance to come up with anything that bothers you, or any queries you might have. Okay, Councillor Sean Percy. Sean?
Yeah, thanks, sir. No, just quickly, in terms of the response that will be submitted from the council, is a draft of that going to come to the committee before it goes? I just some clarity on that, please, Chair. Thanks.
Yeah, Craig, can you confirm?
Yeah, Stacey will be preparing the response. So the usual way we've done it previously is that we normally take on board the minutes, obviously, of the various meeting and some of the issues that are ultimately discussed, and the response then is just a replication, ultimately, of what's been said. If it's the case that there are no questions or there are no particular comments ultimately today, all we would be proposing normally is we do a response just saying they received a copy of it, no comments were made specifically from the committee in respect of it, appreciating it is outside of our control ultimately for that, and that will be a neutral response ultimately will be provided. What we would usually do is maybe circulate a copy to members of the committee in advance, because we have to get the response back in, I believe, by the end of November at this stage, and we don't have a committee. But what we can do is we can send around a copy of the draft response that we propose to make, so members can be cited of it before it goes, and if anyone does want to add anything, then we're happy to consider it at that point, but ultimately it would just be a very neutral response at this stage.
Thanks, Craig. And you know, that's I suppose equivalent to that the councillors note the proposals rather than saying anything for or against. Or,
yeah,
or
I just couldn't remember what we did last time, to be honest. It's been a little while, isn't it?
Yeah, and remembering that all individual members of council, indeed members of the community at large, can respond to this consultation themselves. But it's the authority response you ask about now, and that's how we'll do it. I'll bring in Stacey now. Stacey, is that how we're going to do it?
Yes, Chair, so just to confirm that the normal procedure is, as Craig said, so we'll send a proposed response via email to committee to approve, notwithstanding the fact that every member can send individual responses should they wish. And I know what Karen has done in her previous role when she was Head of Democratic Services is speak in support of some of the potential raises for councillors, because she appreciated how difficult it is to put members in that position to speak in favour of those pay rises. So we propose something similar from an officer perspective to avoid members having to do that difficult wording. But again, in terms of practicalities, we'll send an email response to the committee for you to agree the wording before we send it off based on any discussions today and that wording in support from officers. So I hope that's clear.
Thanks, Stacey. I know you and I have an invite to an IRPW briefing a week on Friday, where they will probably ask me what our members think of their proposals. Well, I'm quite comfortable to say that members have just considered the report and have noted them, the various aspects without being drawn either way. So I'm quite happy and comfortable with that. But if any members have got any specific points, either now or in the meeting or perhaps afterwards, before we go to this briefing a week on Friday, let me know, because in the past, you may remember, we've raised issues about the sensitivities to do with carers when members want to attend council meetings, and and they don't particularly want to claim the carers allowance because they feel isolated or the spotlight is on them or whatever. So, any questions like that on any of the aspects, please let us know. I'm not seeing any hand up now. So, members, are you comfortable that we just note what's being thrown at us at the minute and let the officers draft the authority's response, and Stacey and I just basically take a neutral stance to the briefing a week on Friday? Okay, that's what I think I'm seeing. So the recommendation, which is on page 75, is that we are invited to consider the proposals. We've done so, and to determine the nature of the council's formal response to the proposals. I think that's been clearly outlined as well, hasn't it? So are you all happy with that? So somebody perhaps formally move it. Sean, are you okay to move that?
Yes, I'll move that, Chair.
Thank you. Seconded.
Yes, I second.
Diolch yn Ngharad. No dissent? No, therefore we'll take that as passed. Diolch yn fawr. We'll go to, right on now then to page 159, I think it is. The item 7, the forward work programme for 2021-22. Members see a table there of the items proposed for our meetings. There's a meeting scheduled for the 11th of April. I think we may need a meeting somewhere in between if we are going to be piloting and finalising the way that the public speaking protocol and so on. But for the moment, that's the forward work programme. Items always flexible. Any questions from members? Any comments on that, or are we okay to receive that?
Chair, just to add, I believe a meeting has gone in for December. Apologies, the papers were published before that meeting went in, because we will need an additional meeting in December. So that has gone in members' diaries and will be reflected in the forward work programme then accordingly. You're
right, that rings a bell. And that is on, how is it?
I want to say the 12th or 13th.
Monday the 13th, yeah, in the afternoon. Okay, thank you, you reminded me. All right, so that's Item 7, then, if no one has any questions or anything to add on that. The last item, item 8, is any urgent items. I don't have any urgent items, and that brings us neatly to the end of the meeting. So can I thank you all for your input and a very interesting set of papers today. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thanks to the office.